What in the world is a myRA, and is it a smart investment? Can a myRA be used for something other than retirement savings? And what 5 steps should you take now to prepare for next year's tax return? We'll answer these questions and more on this, the 57th episode of the DoughRoller Podcast.
Welcome to the DoughRoller Podcast, where the best thing money can buy is financial freedom. We help you make more, spend less, and invest the rest. And now your host, Rob Berger.
Whether you're just starting out, buried under a mountain of debt, or well on your way to financial freedom, this is the podcast to help you take your finances to the next level. Hey everybody, Rob Berger here, the host of the show, and got a lot of things to pack into today's episode, so I want to get to it. We're going to be talking about umbrella insurance policies. Got a question from a reader named Brad. I'm going to answer Brad's question. We're going to look at some tax moves you should make now. That's right, after you've filed your returns, hopefully. Moves you should make now to help you better prepare for next year's taxes. And we're going to talk about myRAs. That's the main topic of today's show. It's myRA, My Retirement Accounts. These are new accounts that President Obama in his State of the Union address talked about, and they're in the process of implementing. We're going to cover myRAs to see if they're a good deal for you to save for your retirement. We'll talk about the pros and cons. As always, there's almost always pros and cons, and there are certainly pros and cons of myRA accounts, so we'll talk about that today. Before we jump into it, though, real quick, I've been running a contest, I guess, of sorts this month. This is in April 2014, so if you're listening to this podcast after April of 2014, you'll have to wait for the next one. It's a good reason to listen to the podcasts as they're published, by the way. You can subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, and then you won't miss a show. Anyway, what I'm doing is I'm trying to encourage folks to leave honest ratings and reviews of this podcast in iTunes so that I can learn from you. I can hear from you what you like and what you don't like, how I can improve the show. So to encourage that, if you leave a review in iTunes, just shoot me an email at dr@doughroller.net, and you will be entered to win a $100 Amazon gift card at the end of the month. I'm going to just pick from all of the emails I receive, pick randomly. Again, the review you leave, whether it's good, bad, or otherwise, has nothing to do with your chances of winning the $100 gift card. I'm looking for honest ratings and reviews of the show. The other thing I mentioned in the last episode, episode 56, is that I tend to talk about a money tool of the day, then I have the main part of the show, and then I have a money tip of the day. And for the money tool and money tips of the day, I often turn those into separate blog posts on my site, DoughRoller.net. And so you can check those out. The main part of each show is actually what you'll see if you go to the show notes. So in this case, podcast 57, you'd find the show notes at DoughRoller.net/podcast 57. What I wanted to mention is there is an easy way to keep track of all of this, and that's just to subscribe to our weekly newsletter. I send a newsletter out every Saturday. It's just one a week. I don't inundate you with newsletters, and it's easy to unsubscribe if you ever want to. There's a link in every newsletter to do that. But I include in that newsletter links to the articles I've published that week on DoughRoller, which will include the podcasts as well as the money tools of the day, the money tips of the day, everything published that week. And I link to other articles, on different sites, just a lot of different information that I think will help you make the most of your money. So you can sign up for the newsletter. It's free. It's very easy. Just go to DoughRoller.net/newsletter. And that will take you to a very quick sign-up page, take you all of 20 seconds, and that way be the easiest way for you to keep track of the content that I'm putting out there. Okay, let's get to the money tool of the day, and it actually comes from a question that I received from a reader named Brad. Here's what Brad had to say. Rob, love your blog. I'm a regular reader of your weekly posts and archives. I am confused on umbrella insurance. We have a primary home, a rental home, and 2 vehicles. Can I buy a single $1 or $2 million umbrella policy to cover claims from any of those assets, or do I need separate policies for all of them? Great question, Brad. So let's cover this. And I have an umbrella policy, so I can certainly speak at least a little bit from my own experience. And so first of all, what is an umbrella policy? So an umbrella policy is designed to, for the most part, extend the coverage you have on an existing policy. So, for example, you may have, presumably you do have car insurance, but there are limits on that car insurance. You have for bodily injury, you might have a $300,000 policy limit. So an umbrella insurance policy would extend that limit to the amount of the umbrella policy limit. Now, in Brad's question, he mentioned a $1 or $2 million umbrella policy. At least for the ones I've seen, they start at $1 million, which may seem like, wow, that must cost a fortune. We'll talk about expense in a moment. It's actually surprisingly reasonable. But the policies I've seen, umbrella policies, start at $1 million, and I think they go up. Depends on the insurance company, but as much as $10 million. And but that's what they generally do, is they extend the insurance limits that you have on existing policies. Again, for your car insurance, they will extend your homeowner's insurance coverage. So if someone's hurt on your property, and that sort of thing, you'll extend whatever existing coverage you have under your homeowner's insurance policy. Now, I do want to say that, remember, insurance is a contract, right? So it's going to vary from insurance company to insurance company, from policy to policy. So exactly what an umbrella insurance policy will cover, you need to make sure, based on a review of the policy with your insurance agent, it's not one size fits all. It can vary from policy to policy and company to company. However, the umbrella policies that I'm familiar with also cover other things that you might not have an existing policy for, like slander, libel, false arrest, malicious prosecution, and other sort of personal liability situations. And you may say, well, why would I need those? Well, you may not, but they tend to come prepackaged with umbrella policies, at least the ones that I have seen. By the way, you know the difference between slander and libel? Maybe if you're on Jeopardy, this could come in handy. Slander is when it's injurious spoken statement. You slander someone with your spoken word. You say something false about another person. Libel is basically the same thing, except it's not spoken, it's written. Anyway, I guess that's a little side note. The point is, umbrella insurance policy does have some primary insurance coverage for those sorts of things. Most people, at least in my experience, that get an umbrella policy, though, are focused on extending their car insurance limits and their homeowners limits, and this was also mentioned in Brad's email, to cover rental properties. And that's the reason that I initially got an umbrella policy. So for my policy, here's how it works. If I want to add a rental property that I own to my umbrella policy, I have to give the address to my agent. He adds it to the policy. What he's told me, and I have my policy through Nationwide, is I think the number is 4. I can add up to 4 rental properties, plus I have my own home. Up to 4 rental properties very easily. Shoot them an email with the address. It's added. No big deal. I think when you get beyond 4, there could be some additional underwriting that the insurance company will have to undertake, and there could be some additional fees above the standard premium. But in my case, I have 4 rental properties, so it works out fine. But that's just something to consider. Again, that's with Nationwide. With my policy, it could vary from, again, policy to policy and company to company, insurance company. But it's great to cover, again, my rental properties. Of course, I have insurance on those, primary insurance, but this umbrella policy extends that limit. And that's kind of just an extra safeguard for me and my family. And as I mentioned, they kind of started at $1 million, but they're relatively inexpensive. And I don't have my actual premiums in front of me. But I know when I first got my $1 million umbrella policy, it was just a couple $100 a year. Not insignificant, but probably a lot less than you might think for that level of insurance if you're not familiar with it. Part of the reason for that, again, is that for the most part, it's not primary insurance. I mentioned a few exceptions, but for the most part, it's secondary insurance. It only kicks in if your loss exceeds the limits on your underlying coverage, and that's one of the reasons that the coverage is relatively inexpensive. The odds of having that kind of claim are not high. But in any event, that's how umbrella policies work, at least in my experience. And so to answer Brad's question, you could have one policy that would cover your rental properties, your home, your cars, and obviously you'd pick the amount of coverage you want. I've since increased mine from $1 million to $2 million as we bought more rental properties and that sort of thing. When I first bought it, we had, I think, 2 properties. So in any event, that is a great tool to have to protect you and your family from potential liability. So you might want to check out umbrella insurance policy if you think it's right for you. Okay, myRAs, M-Y, capital R, capital A. That's how it's abbreviated. It stands for My Retirement Account. And this was something, as I mentioned at the top of the show, that President Obama unveiled in the State of the Union address. So they're not available yet. They're going to become available later this year, later in 2014. So I thought, why not cover it now so you can begin to think about whether it's right for you? As I mentioned, with everything in life, just about there are pros and cons. I tend to think that myRAs really are not for most people. That's my view, and I'll explain why. But I do see that there are some advantages to it, and I'm sure some people will take advantage of it. And so I wanted to cover it today. So let's kind of go down. I'm going to tick off about 11 sort of things about myRA accounts we can walk through. You'll understand, hopefully when we're done, what they are, how they work, and then you can decide whether they're right for you or perhaps someone you know. So first, myRAs are a workplace savings account. What that means is you contribute to a myRA through deductions from your paycheck. Now, that makes them very convenient. In that sense, they're similar to a 401k, where your employer will deduct money from your paycheck based on however much you want to contribute up to the limits, and it gets put into a 401k. myRAs work similarly, except they're not controlled by your employer. Your employer simply is sort of the vehicle to funnel your money and your paycheck through to the myRA account. So these are workplace savings accounts. You can, if you're unemployed, you could not go out and open a myRA. They get the contributions come from deductions from your paycheck. That's the first thing. The second thing is, how do you qualify for them? Well, as you'll see as we work through this, they are very similar, although not identical, but very similar to Roth IRAs, and that's true with qualifying to open and contribute to a myRA as well. Similar to a Roth IRA, if you're single and make less than $129,000, or for couples $191,000 a year, you can open and contribute to a myRA. If you make more than that, like with a Roth IRA, you cannot open a myRA. And similar to IRAs, they have the same contribution limits. So the annual contribution limit is $5,500. If you're 50 or older, that goes up by $1,000. You can contribute $6,500. But there is a difference. A myRA is capped at a total contribution of $15,000. Once your myRA account were to reach $15,000, you would have to roll it over into a Roth IRA. The most a myRA can have is $15,000. Actually, and the longest it can be open is 30 years. So if you didn't hit that $15,000 and 30 years passed, then you'd have to roll it over into a Roth IRA as well. I'm guessing most people won't have to worry about that 30-year time limit. So $15,000, that's the thing to remember. Once it hits $15,000, it gets rolled over into a Roth IRA, and so that's how that works. Now, one thing that's very different from a myRA on the one hand and IRAs on the other is that you don't have any investing choices. All myRA funds get invested in the same thing. It's called the G Fund, the Government Securities Investment Fund, which is a fund. If you're a federal employee and you have a thrift savings plan, you may be familiar with this fund. That's where it's found. And that is the only investment you can have in a myRA account. So unlike an IRA that you might open up at Vanguard, for example, you don't get to pick and choose where you invest your money, number one. Number two, you cannot invest in stocks or stock mutual funds or ETFs, not available. You can't invest in other types of bond funds. You get one choice, the G Fund, the Government Securities Investment Fund. That's where all of your money in the myRA account will go. That's probably the biggest drawback to a myRA is the limit the limit in your investment options. It's the reason that I'm not a big fan of myRAs for most people. So what, in terms of the G Fund, it is obviously invest in government securities. So you might be asking, okay, well, what's it return? Well, in 2012, it returned 1.47%. I am looking at, and I will leave a link to this in the show notes, the Thrift Savings Plan website, tsp.gov, has a page on the G Fund and its returns, and I'm looking at it now, and let's see. For 2013, the return was 1.89%. From 2003 to 2012, it averaged 3.61%, which was actually above the average inflation rate of 2.5%. And that's really the goal of this fund, is to invest in government securities that have no risk of losing your principal, and that have returns that beat inflation. The returns aren't great when compared to long-term returns on stocks, but that's the goal, is to beat inflation. Over the last 10 years, it's done that. And those are the kinds of returns that you can expect with this fund. Again, this to me is the biggest drawback of a myRA account. I think the idea here, though, was to keep it simple. And here's my thinking before I kind of go through some other things about this account that you need to understand, is that a lot of people, in fact, probably most people that listen to this podcast, will invest in a Roth or deductible IRA rather than a myRA account. And by the way, if you can't contribute $5,500 to both, if you contribute $5,500 to your myRA account, that's your limit for the year, including for other types of IRAs. Likewise, if you contribute $5,500 to an IRA or a Roth IRA, that's your limit. You can't then contribute to a myRA. So for total contribution limits, a myRA account is treated like an IRA. So it's sort of one or the other. You could contribute a little to a little bit of money to both. Your limits still would be $5,500 total. But most people listening to this podcast, I suspect, will simply open up an IRA, whether it's at Vanguard or at a place like Betterment or Motif Investing or wherever, and invest in either a target date retirement fund or a number of mutual funds to get a nice diversification between stocks and bonds. That's what most folks will do, at least that I talk to. But there are some that are just, for whatever reason, they're just not ready to do that. Maybe they find all of that intimidating. And so I think the idea of the myRA was, we're going to make this as simple as possible to get people started investing for the retirement. This is not a retirement solution, and I don't think it's intended to be a retirement solution. It is sort of a first step. And for me, if a myRA helps you or someone you know make that first step, man, take it. Absolutely take it. And should this be your last step? Oh, goodness, no. And should you eventually get over to IRAs and Roth IRAs in places like Vanguard or Betterment or what have you, absolutely you should. And that doesn't even factor into account 401ks and 403bs. But as a first step, if you're scared to take that first step and a myRA is available to you, man, take it. And then hopefully you'll move past that as you get a little more experience, a little more comfort in investing. But again, the one investment, that's the big downside to a myRA. Now, what makes it such a good first step, though, for folks? A couple of things. One, the minimum to open the account, $25. I mean, really, we've got no excuses. Invest, don't invest, open a myRA, don't open a myRA, but the excuses have got to be gone out the window by now. $25 to open up an account. And get this, $5 minimum contribution per paycheck. That's it, $5. The cost of a mocha at Starbucks gets you a contribution per paycheck. If that's where you are, if that's what you can afford, do it. And over time, you'll hopefully get to invest more. You'll grow out of the myRA into an IRA. But as a first step, if this is where you are, take it. As I think I mentioned, principal is guaranteed, which is really not so much a function of myRA accounts, really, but it's more of what they invest in, the Government Securities Investment Fund, the G fund. The principal is secured. So that's good. There's no risk. Again, with risk, though, comes higher returns. So that's the trade-off that you get there. You can keep your accounts when you leave or change jobs, which is nice. Now, there's one other aspect of myRA accounts that I want to cover, and I know I've kind of run through the different characteristics and factors about these accounts. If you want a slower pace of this, obviously just go to the show notes where I'll have all this typed out. That's DoughRoller.net/podcast57. But there's one other feature of a myRA account that's really important to understand, and that's this. There are no penalties for early withdrawal. None. There's no 5-year rule as you may know with Roth IRAs, or you don't have to use it for the purchase of a home. There are no penalties for early withdrawal. So what that means, and this is a point that I don't think is discussed a lot, at least by the government and those analyzing these accounts, is that it could be a really good option as an alternative to a savings account. I mean, this is not going to replace, obviously, stock investments, stock mutual funds, But for example, as I mentioned, last year it returned 1.89%. That clobbers a savings account. I mean, I track online banks, and their best rate for a savings account right now is about 0.9%, just under 1%. So you're getting a bigger return for your investment in a myRA. So it could be, if this is available to you, an alternative to a savings account, whether you're saving for, maybe you're saving to buy a home and you want to keep your money safe. And right now you've got it, you got money in a savings account. Well, you could boost your return a little bit with a myRA account, or maybe you're saving for something else. So, or, maybe it's just a place you want to park your emergency fund. That is at least something to consider. It could be a nice alternative to a savings account. Now, there is one important limitation to using a myRA as a savings account type vehicle, and it's something that I see getting confused a bit. I was on the Wall Street Journal website, for example, reading an article about myRAs, and one of the things on this article it said was, it was 9 things to know about Obama's myRA accounts, and number 5 was, there will not be a tax penalty if the investments are withdrawn, and I've mentioned that. However, there's a slight footnote, so to speak, that you need to understand when it relates to this penalty-free withdrawal. And this actually comes from treasurydirect.gov, and I will link to this. It's a one-page summary of myRAs. I will link to it in the show notes. And here's the thing they say. Your contributions can be withdrawn tax-free at any time. Earnings, that is the interest, right, that you would earn in this account, earnings generally can be withdrawn tax-free after age 59 and a half. So you could be in a situation where you can take your contributions out tax-free, but you would have to leave your earnings in the account or eventually rolled over to a Roth IRA. So that is a limitation that you should consider when you think about myRAs and possibly using them for a savings account. It could still be a good place to park your money, earn some extra interest. Sure, the interest stays in your account for retirement, but still beats a savings account. And think about this too. I mentioned that the return on a myRA is roughly, the last year was about 1.8, 1.9%. That's tax free. And so comparing that to a savings account of say 0.9% that is not tax free, the difference is even greater. So something to think about there. So there you go. That's a myRA. That's how it works. Those are the pros and cons from my perspective. And as I mentioned earlier, these are going to be available later in 2014, so you have some time to figure out what works best for you. Okay, the money tip of the day is this. We're going to talk about 5 tax moves to make now. That is, right after you've filed your tax returns. Hopefully you filed your returns. I suppose some may have filed for an extension, but we've moved past April 15th, and I think it's a good time to think ahead to next year. What can we do now to help us a year from now? And so I have 5 things I would suggest. The first thing is, and I guess this maybe doesn't help us so much for next year, but it's got something we gotta mention, and that is, if you got a refund, use it wisely. You may pay down debt, you may invest it. I think it's we want balance in life. So if you're going to have a little bit of fun with your refund, that's great too. Maybe you're going to go on a vacation, whatever. But don't just blow your refund, particularly if you have non-mortgage debt. If you've got credit card debt, high interest debt, car loans, use the refund. If you got one, if you're lucky enough to have received a refund, use it wisely. Have a little fun with it, great. But make sure you do some smart things with that money as well. And that kind of leads me to tip number 2, and that is, if you got a large refund or if you owed taxes, now is the time to reevaluate your withholdings at work. Maybe they're taking out too much money. Maybe they're not taking out enough. But we're still early enough in the year you can make adjustments to your withholdings to better align how much money is coming out of your check each pay period with the actual taxes that you owe. Now, while you do this, it's one thing that's important is to evaluate whether there are significant changes in your finances for 2014 that could change your tax liability picture this year as compared to last. So even if you got a big refund, before you go making changes to your withholdings, you do want to ask yourself, okay, are things different in 2014? Maybe if I don't change anything, I won't get that big refund next year. So that's something to think about. But once you've considered that, look at possibly changing your withholdings to either increase them if you owed a lot of taxes or to bring them down a bit if you got a big refund. Okay. Tip number 3 is plan now for your IRA contributions. I thought it was a good tip in light of our topic today of myRAs. If you contribute to IRAs, whether it's a deductible or a Roth IRA, you can certainly wait and up until the time you file your taxes to make that contribution. And if you've got the cash set aside to do that, that's fine. But for many of us, the best way is to make monthly or quarterly contributions throughout the year. Just makes it easier to deal with that, in effect, an expense, if you will. And $5,500 or $6,500 if you're 50 or older is a lot of money. And so if that's part of your retirement savings and part of your tax planning, figure out now how you're going to make that contribution. It may involve making contributions on a monthly basis rather than waiting until the end. And that brings me to tip number 4, and that is if you have a health savings account, plan those contributions as well. I think a health savings account is a fabulous vehicle, not only for paying for health costs, but ultimately could also help you in retirement. If you have these, you obviously know what they are. They're related to high deductible insurance policies. I won't dive deep into the details of health savings accounts. Maybe that'll be a topic for a future show. But if you do have that health savings account, or if it's available to you, take advantage of it. Plan your contributions. It's an excellent way to reduce your tax liability and at the same time plan for future medical expenses. The 5th and final tip of the day is this: organize your paperwork now. If you're like me, you get to tax time and you're aggravated because you didn't plan better throughout the year and you've got tax paperwork everywhere and it's not well organized. You ever do this? We give a lot of household items away. Charities will call us up. They swing by and pick them up. We'll put them out on the porch and label them. I don't remember doing that as a kid. I don't know how recent that is. I don't ever remember my parents setting out, clothes and household items we no longer needed for donations. Of course, we probably didn't have a whole lot of extra back then, but at least where we live, we get calls probably several times a month. And but what happens at tax time is I'll get those receipts, and sure enough, I'll open a receipt from one of them, and it's totally blank because they don't actually itemize the things you give away and tell you what they're worth. That's your job. And so I try to be better now. As soon as we give something, I get that receipt that day, write down what we gave, give a conservative estimate of their value. But that's just one example. Tracking charitable organizations and other information relevant for your taxes. In my case, I run a business, so I've got business expenses. The paperwork can become overwhelming. And if I stay on top of it throughout the year, things are much, much better for me come tax time. I was pretty good last year. One of the things that I use is called a scan snap. A Fujitsu scan snap. It's a paper scanner, and I can scan anything of any size, double-sided, single-sided, anything, and it'll go right into a PDF, right into Dropbox or on my hard drive, and I can organize it by tax year and topic, and it's very easy to do. But here's the thing. You got to start organizing your paperwork now and throughout the year. If you wait until the beginning of next year when you're getting ready to do your taxes, it's too late. That you've already got a built-in headache as you prepare your tax returns. So as you think about moves you can make now to make next year's filing easier, organizing your paperwork, create the files you need now that you know you're going to need throughout the year so that when you get that tax receipt, whatever it might be, you know right where it needs to go, and things are organized and ready to go for next year. There you go. That's the money tip of the day. As always, you can shoot me an email at dr@doughroller.net. Love to get the emails, whether you have a question, comment, topic you want me to cover in future podcasts, whatever it may be. Shoot me an email. Happy to hear from you. Until next time, remember, the best thing money can buy is financial freedom.